Good morning, YouTube. Welcome back. This is the garden update part 2. If you didn't check out the part 1, I will link that above, below. I am going through my garden slowly to give you updates because it's been so long since you haven't seen anything from the garden this year. So I'm doing it in small pieces because I tried to do half of it in one day and it was way too long. So this is part 2, the rest of the block bed, the original block bed. There's more than one now. This area, see, the dry beans and the tomatoes were over there, which I talked about in part 1. This middle section here had beets and carrots. You can see a large open area with nothing in it. That's where the carrots were. And then here's where the beets were. And I had some potatoes going over to about here. The reason that the carrots are gone is because, well, I had to pull them when I pulled the weeds. I did get some that were edible, but they would have been a lot better if I had weeded it sooner. Just like in part 1, I think I mentioned my issue with weeds. Well, I had another issue down here, which I have some footage of before I weeded it. It looks like a meadow. I'll put that in here too. I pulled all the weeds out, and the carrots, it was really hard to get most of the weeds out without disturbing the carrots, so some of them actually had an okay root on it, so I just went ahead and pulled all the carrots. They're smaller than they would have been, but I don't know if they would have done much better leaving them in there longer because they had already been in the ground for a while, because I planted those fairly early. The beets, nothing is edible in those beets. The plants are all small and the roots are already woody, those that had roots. Some did get pulled out with the weeds, but there were ones that didn't really have a root growing on them. The weeds were blocking too much light, so they didn't grow as well as they should have. The carrots at least were as tall as the weeds, so they were just competing for nutrients. Whereas the beets, they were competing for light too. I have left the beets in the ground to save for seed because I do need more beet seed. I don't know if they will go to seed this year or not. But I'm going to leave them in the ground and see what happens. I still have a couple months. Maybe now with some light, maybe they will. I've never saved beet seeds before. But I really want to. The ones with the green tops, those are the golden beets. And the purple ones, they're just regular red beets. There's bull's blood and Detroit red top or something like that. Detroit beets. But I'm going to see if they go to seed. Which would be awesome if they do. Then we had potatoes. Now, there was a little bit that went over and then into this corner and all the way down to the end. But not all the way across. On the back, you can see the fencing up. I had peas growing up the fencing, and then all the potatoes in front. I planted the peas first so that they could get a little bit of growth on them before I put the potatoes in. And I did 4 kinds of peas. King Tut, Early Perfection, Sugar Magnolia, and Sugar Snap. The purple varieties I just bought this year, those all came up really quick. They got taller before the potatoes, grew fine. The two green varieties were older seed because I'd grown them before, and they took longer to come up, and the potatoes just over top of them. They didn't grow very well. They didn't produce very much because the potatoes were too tall. That being said, I'm going to plant the peas a little bit sooner than I plant the potatoes. But other than that, the ones that came up early, it did work really well. And I think it was a good use of space. I just need to make sure the peas go in a little bit sooner than the potatoes. I've already pulled all the potatoes, obviously. I grew red Norland and Kennebec potatoes. I was very impressed with the red Norland. The Kennebec, not so much. They were okay, but they didn't produce as much as the red Norland. And my gardener loves the Kennebec potatoes. He talks about them all the time. That's why I wanted them. Maybe it's just not the best potato for me. I do like that it's thin-skinned and they're tasty potatoes, but not as good a producer as the red Norland. Red Norland is definitely a keeper. When I pulled out the potatoes, I did replant, but just this, I had the reds up here, so I replanted in the corner area with the red, and the Kennebec in this square down here, just to be able to hopefully grow my own seed potatoes for next year. I would love to be able to do that. I don't have a good storage place for potatoes. So the ones that I just pulled out, I don't think will last, because I don't have an unheated garage. My basement, temperature-wise, would be probably okay, but it's too damp in my basement. I've tried to store food in there before, and it did not end well. So I'm hoping that, because these will be a very late harvest, I'm hoping that they will last until planting time next year. We'll see how that goes. Because I did have some last year that I planted late, although they had already sprouted when I planted them. These had not. So we'll see. But the ones I had planted late, some of those were still okay-ish come planting time this year. And they actually went in a different bed with some store-bought potatoes that were going bad. So I just dumped everything in there and see, whatever grows, grows. But it's an experiment. I want to be able to grow my own seed potatoes, but I don't have proper winter storage. So maybe if it's a really late planting and harvest, maybe those will last long enough. We'll see. I planted some why do I always do that with that one? Siamese giant cucumbers along the trellis behind these potatoes, and only one came up, so I've got one. If it grows, it's a massive vine, and it's not actually a cucumber, it's really a melon that tastes like a cucumber, but it's huge. It's like this big. They work really well for relish. That's what most of my relish was made from a couple years ago. On the other end, down along the trellis here, I planted some more vine peach. And there's it looks like 4 of them growing. Something like that. We'll see how they do with how late they were planted. It's really just an experiment. I didn't plant anything in the middle yet. I still have a few weeds to take care of along the far side. I just haven't been on the other side to weed. But I'm going to put some peas there, and I need to do that really soon because we're running out of time to get fall harvested peas. Again, I've never grown fall peas before, so we'll see how that goes. But I did find a volunteer tomato when I dug up the rest of the potatoes. So I stuck it up on the trellis. We'll see if it gives anything. Things don't grow as well over here in late season because of the tree. The tree's all filled out and it blocks a lot of light. The days start getting shorter. In the middle of the summer, when the days are at their longest, it doesn't really make as much of a difference. And in the spring, before the tree is full of leaves, obviously, it doesn't block much light then. So I'm not so worried about more harvests over here. I just really am just experimenting. I'm trying to make the best use of what I have. And I realize the limitations over here for late season. So I'm trying to work within those, and we'll see. It's all just an experiment. Always learning. I mean, this is my classroom. At the base of my tree is the strawberries. These are everbearings. They did pretty well this year, and they're definitely filling out. There's definitely runners going on in there. And they're doing pretty well. They still need weeded a bit, but there's so many strawberries plants at this point that they choke out most of the weeds, which is awesome. So it doesn't need a whole lot of weeding. And I haven't had to do a whole lot through the year, which I like. Now, over here next to the tree is a arch trellis of runner beans. And then on the south side of that is the blawhilled bean, which is a whole lot like the purple potted beans. In fact, they're almost identical. I've grown both of them, and it was very, very hard to try and tell them apart. The blawhills tended to be just a little bit flatter than the purple potted. They taste the same. They grow about the same. My purple potted bean seeds, something happened to the jar that I had them in, and they didn't germinate. So I switched to the blawhills, and they seem to be doing fine. Now last year, I actually had those switched trellises, and they didn't do as well. The runner beans were getting too much sun in the middle of summer, and the blawhills were not getting enough. If you've never grown runner beans before, they like cooler temperatures, and at least here they will put on a lot of growth, and some flowers in early summer, as it gets hotter, it slows down. And then, you know, after about September and into October, then they just go wild. When they stop putting out flowers so much, they do keep growing length. So, as you can see, that trellis is already pretty full. They'll keep going. They'll end up, like, down into the grass next to it. But they'll put on a lot of beans, you know, here next month and into October. Whereas the blawhilled beans or any other regular pole bean, they start out a little slower in growth, but as it warms up, then they really expand. Now, everything has their limits on how much heat they like. We don't get a lot of 90 degrees, and even when we do, it generally doesn't go above that. Every once in a while, you know, we'll hit maybe 92 or 3. It's very rare to get anything above that. And we don't even have that many 90-degree days. We get a lot of 80s, a whole lot of 80s through most of the summer, and not a ton of humidity. I have had blight problems with pole beans before. My first year growing in September, it was just constant rain, constant rain, constant rain, and it really knocked them out. But the next year and every year after that, it hasn't been that bad in late summer, early fall, and they've just kept producing happily until the frost comes and kills them off. They do start to slow down after a while, but generally speaking, they don't mind the cooler temperatures when they're bigger. Frost will kill both of them though. And I just think they look really gorgeous. I've always loved the beans on the trellises. And speaking of beans on trellises, my purple arch, these are yard-long beans, and they are growing pretty well. We're even starting to get some little tiny beans. The little stringy looking part there. There's a little tiny yard-long beans. One more section for today. When I went to, well, you don't even know. Last year I went to the Heartland Homesteaders Picnic in Kentucky. They had a seed swap there. I got a lot of great footage, but I never got around to editing it. I would still really love to put that out, but I don't know if anyone would even be interested in watching it at this point, because that was almost a year ago. We're actually getting ready for the next one next month if everything works out. But they had a seed swap. While I was there, I saw purple hull peas and zipper cream peas. And I didn't realize they were a different thing. I thought they were just peas. I was like, oh, more pea seeds. No, they are not. You eat them like a pea, but it's actually a bean. So they like warmer temperatures. And these are bush varieties-ish. They're like semi-vining, but they don't get super tall. But I'm really excited for these. Now, this variety here in particular is the zipper cream. It's just a 4x4 area. That's where my garlic was. And they still have not put out any peas yet, or beans. But I'm excited to try them. I've never had a southern pea before. Some people call them cow peas. Black-eyed peas are similar, and I don't even think I've had black-eyed peas before. I know what they are, but I've never had them, and I didn't realize it was different than like a green sweet pea. Always learning something new. Oh, actually, I think I do see a flower on one. Okay, so they're just starting to flower. Yeah, I only see one. Hopefully soon. But I didn't put those in until after I pulled my garlic out. And I had that 4x4 area full of garlic. But I did really good with the garlic. Now that's from store-bought garlic. And last year I harvested my first round from the store-bought. So it was 2 years ago that I bought the store-bought. Harvested them last year, replanted from those in the fall, and then harvested from those this year. And it worked out really well. I actually don't use that much fresh garlic because I always forget about it. I've always had powdered garlic in the cabinet, and fresh garlic I generally forget about. I still have some left from last year because I always forgot about it. So I really need to just dehydrate most of it. I do put some in raw honey for medicinal purposes. Works really well. And that's generally, you know, soon after I harvest it anyway. Just put a bunch of them in the honey. And but for cooking, I usually forget, unless a recipe that I'm reading, and that would just be if I'm reading a new recipe, because older ones I generally remember, so I don't look at it a lot, unless it's like, oh wait, what temperature was that, or how long in the oven? Then I'll go back to it and go, oh hey, that was supposed to have fresh garlic. Too late now. Otherwise, I just grab the garlic powder out of the cabinet. I always have. Fresh is better. I just always forget about it. But I will be replanting, and I need to replant there, so I hope those get done by October. I don't know how long of a life they have once they start putting out the peas. So we'll see. Always experimenting. So anyway, we're gonna wrap this up today. I gotta get school started. It might rain. And we're trying to keep these shorter. Part 1 was still a little bit longer than I was aiming for. It is what it is. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for coming along with me today. God bless you. Shalom.